Alrighty, guys, welcome back to the Identity Project. And yes, I said alrighty, guys, again for all of you who have DM'd me and told me to quit saying alrighty, guys. It's just ingrained in me. I love it. I don't know. But I have a special guest tonight, somebody I've known for a really long time and has become a pretty good friend of mine over the last, how many years has it been now? I don't even know, five,
Oh,
six,
yeah,
seven, something
five,
like
six
that.
years. Yeah.
But the famous, no, none other than Mr. Andy Luten. What's going on, brother? How are you?
Doing great, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, dude. For those of you out there that are listening that don't know Andy, real quick, what's the Instagram handle? Because your pictures are just insane.
Real Andy Luten. I,
Real
I
Andy
have.
Luten.
I'm
He's
a
that famous.
narcissist. Yeah. I imagine that there are fakers out there, but I am the real, just real at real Andy Luten.
Will the real Andy Luten please stand up?
Exactly. I
That's
should have
awesome.
stood right there. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, for people watching, that would have been epic. But hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe
I'm
we'll
too
we'll
humble for that.
we'll try later. Maybe at the
Yeah.
end. But dude, thanks for taking the time, man. I'm excited to dive into your story. I feel like you're just an interesting man. You have a lot of different things going on, and I'm excited to dive into those things kind of later in the conversation. But where were you born? What were you kind of like as a kid growing up?
Oh man. So I was born in Tampa, Florida. That's something a lot of people don't know about me, especially with how proud I am of Texas and that it's my favorite country in the world. One of my greatest flaws as a human being is that I'm not a native Texan. I was born in Tampa. My family is from Texas. My brother was born in Texas. My dad took a job in Tampa. I was born, and in about 6 months, I put my foot down. I said, "Dang it, we need to get back to Texas." Or maybe it was my dad getting a job back in Texas, but it was probably me. So we moved back to Houston, Texas when I was like 6 months old. I was in Houston for a little while, and then things kind of changed pretty severely.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that about you. I definitely thought that you were from Texas for sure. I mean,
I
diehard
mean,
Aggie over here.
absolutely. I mean, in the most literal sense, I got here as fast as I could. I know it's a bumper sticker, but I very much got here as fast as I could. So I hope it grants me some reprieve. But if I ever run for governor or anything, and somebody says, "Are you a native Texan?" I have to hang my head in shame and walk off the stage. It's not a requirement or anything in Texas, but I'd have to anyway. Just I don't want to be found out.
Hey, well, it's okay. I mean, this is the I kind of caught crap, I guess, for I was always like a Florida Gators fan. So from like the Tebow era till now, I've always liked them and for no reason other than I guess maybe Tebow. But yeah, they're like, "You're from Texas. Why do you like Florida?" I'm like, "I don't know. I've always enjoyed watching them play."
Yeah, and I'm technically from Florida, and I could not be less interested in Florida, other than their public disclosure laws, which have led to the whole Florida man phenomenon. So if, for those you don't know, like just type Florida man, and it's all these hilarious things like Florida man jumps through a parachute on fire in order to get to Denny's before the Super Slam was, whatever. It's because they have public disclosure laws that they have to disclose what happened in a police report, but they can't use anybody's name before they're convicted. So every like hilariously bad cop story starts off with, Florida man suspected in this. So it's like Florida man is this like person who's completely insane.
Really?
But
I
yeah,
had
yeah.
absolutely no idea about that. But
Oh
I
man,
really don't watch
it
the news at all. So I feel like
well,
I'm kind of behind in some of these things.
but it's so the Florida man phenomenon. If you're gonna watch or listen to news, just make it about Florida man, and
Florida
it'll be
man.
great because
All right. I got to
because
look
you're
up
like,
Florida
okay,
man.
there's somebody like that in the world, and the idea of that is just hilarious to me. So, anyways, sorry about that.
That's hilarious. So like obviously, I mean, you were super young when you moved here, so you basically lived here your whole life for the most part. We'll just say that.
Been in Texas my whole life, split time between Houston and Waco. Now, when I say Waco, this was pre-fixer upper Waco. So it was a dark and terrible place. Maybe not dark and terrible, but like Waco used to have a really high murder rate, I think in the late 80s. It was like the second or third highest murder rate per capita in the United States or something like that. But then Chip and Joanna moved in and like everybody, their houses are worth like $300,000 more now. It's changed so much when I was from when I was young. But yeah, so my dad passed away in 1991, back when I was 8 years old. My mom got remarried, and that's when we moved from Houston, up to Waco. And I was in Waco through high school.
Got it. Got it. Wow. So at 8 years old, your dad passed. How, I mean, what was that like for you? I mean, do you remember like what that transition was like? I mean, was like, were you too young at that time to really know what was going on? Like,
In some ways, I was too young to understand certain elements of it, but my dad and I got along pretty well. And, I had an older brother, and we had a really good community in Houston who really, with the exception of one family, they really took us in and really took us under their wings and made sure we had everything we needed. And, my dad fought really hard, had colon cancer. He made it a lot longer than anybody thought he would, but eventually, I don't like to say he lost this battle. He ran out of time, I guess, or cancer never had to fight harder. I mean, whatever sort of cancer motivational statement you want to put in there. Uh, but yeah, so he died thankfully at home, and he died in full mental capacity. So we had actually some really sweet time together because he was at home doing hospice. So we got to spend some time together. And I mean, he was in a lot of pain, but he got to say goodbye to us, and we got to say goodbye to him. So in a certain way, I'm grateful that if he was going to die, I'm glad he died in that way, because we got to spend time with him. And he died in the summer, so it's not like I was at school all day. I mean, he passed in August of '91, and so we had been home from school and stuff like that. So in a weird way, it's something terrible that happened, but it happened in a very sweet way, and it was tough. But I remember 2 or 3 days before he passed away, he got my brother and I together, and he told us that he wanted us to look after our mom, and that if one of us wanted to, go ahead and go to Texas A&M, because that's where he went. And he was a sometimes proud Aggie. Uh, he actually loved breaking the rules of A&M, especially the Corps cadets, but that's a different story. Um, so when he died, I was really sad, of course. But at the same time, what really echoed in my mind was his call to take care of our mom. And so that's how I kind of threw myself into it. I wanted to make sure that she was doing okay. I wanted to make sure the family was doing okay. I mean, it's amazing the kind of singular focus you can have as an 8 year old, um, to take care of somebody like that. And I think young boys especially have really big hearts, for the most part. Sometimes they disguise about being a little, Tasmanian devil or something. But I was always kind of a sweetheart, and I didn't really like causing a fuss or anything. So, it was just mainly making sure my mom was okay, and then making sure my brother was okay. And then I think moving to Waco was the biggest transition for me. And that's when you realize, okay, what I knew, what was my present is now my past. Now I have to
mm,
figure out what a new present looks like. So
mm,
I think that was the biggest deal. And it all happened, I don't want to say fast. It happened when it was supposed to happen. So we moved to Waco, pretty quickly, like a year later after my mom had gotten remarried. And so I had to, put a new life together. But Waco was a great place to grow up, and found a new community. And that was a big part of it, is right, finding your tribe and your people. Um, and this was all before the social media days, which I'm really thankful for, because I think it's harder to find a group of people and a community now, with social media. I think what we intended to unite us has divided us, if you will. And I don't want to go into too much of a ramble there, but that's the end of my ramble about really whatever it was. I don't know. I get started and I keep going. That.
yeah. Hey, I'm the same exact way. I love going off on tangents. It's all good. I love it. But yeah, man, I mean, I think that's, wow. I can't even imagine, but it's cool to see you like step up in that regard and like want to be basically like the man of the family. Was there any, like, I don't know, hard or issues, I guess, like knowing that your mom remarried, like, you hear like sometimes like the oldest son and like the stepdad kind of like battling it out a little bit. Was there any of that at all, or did y'all get together pretty well?
There was. So my brother's 3 years older than I am,
Oh,
and
okay.
he and my stepdad had some friction. Thankfully, when you hear about all these like horrible stories that are happening to children these days, like they didn't get along the best. They're both decent guy. Or my brother is one hell of a human being. He's I wish I had his capacity to care for people, and I wish I had a heart half the size of his, because my gosh, he will stop at nothing to make sure that people are taken care of. My stepdad definitely had some issues, but he was a good person with some issues, right? Who among us does not have issues? It's hard for me to really cast that stone. But there were, we got along great. He worked hard, and we all worked hard. And growing up in Waco, your school was your community, and my church was my community, and my family stopped at nothing. My mom stopped at nothing to make sure that my brother and I had access to whatever opportunities we wanted. So I was very blessed, very, very blessed in my upbringing. I was more fortunate than most, that my parents could decide together. My mom and my stepdad could decide whether or not to say yes to something that wasn't decided for them. And I know there's a lot of people who don't have that experience. So I consider my childhood, I would root for the same kind of childhood for my kids, maybe without the me dying and then, having a stepdad. But you know what I mean? Like there's nothing about my childhood that I regret. And as far as my mom remarrying, I wanted her to be happy. And she was, all of a sudden she had an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old boy who had just lost their dad. That's a lot. And my mom is the sweetest person in the world, and everybody uniformly agrees with that. And even, heck, we were in the Woodlands, I think probably 5-6 years ago, and we were at a payway. Then my mom's a school teacher, and she was a school teacher and has been was for 35 years, I think. And so we were at the payway cashier place, and I think it was the assistant manager walked up and she goes, "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Luten?" And that was a student that my mom had. And she was she made such an impact on her, mainly because of how kind and sweet she was. She remembered my mom, and she was one of her best teachers. So having a mom like that, you just want her to be happy and want somebody that's going to take care of her. And she was happy. And, my stepdad, Steve, was around to help with my brother and I. So, it was, that was my motivation, for my mom to be happy and get whatever richness in life that in my opinion she deserved.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. So when y'all moved to Waco, you were 8 or 9 there. So what was that, middle school then? Or you were going
No,
into
so
middle school?
I was 9 years old. I was going into the 4th grade
Going into
at
fourth
South
grade.
Bosque Elementary School in Waco, Texas.
Got it. Got it. Did you, what, like, kind of like in school, I mean, what type of kid were you? Were you like introverted, extroverted? Like,
Oh man, I was the same as I am now. I was an extroverted introvert, and then I wanted all the trappings of an extrovert, and I could kind of pull it off for a little while, but then I would eventually revert into myself. Um, how do I phrase this? I don't think the word goody goody is enough. I'll put it this way: I was the guy who wore khakis in high school, and I didn't have to. But it wasn't even like preppy. I would wear like khakis and a t-shirt because I just wanted to wear khakis. I don't know. I've always hated being a troublemaker, and I've hated stirring stuff up. So I was a good kid. I was a average to above average student. If I was interested in something academically, there's nothing that could stop me from learning everything about it. If I wasn't, then Jesus himself could have said, you need to learn this to get into heaven. And I would say, well, if there's going to be polarized equations or pre-calculus in heaven, then maybe not. I think at one point there was a lady, my pre-cal teacher, about polarized equations. She goes, Luten, because she always referred to us by our last name. And she had my brother 3 years before me, and I guess she just never really cared to learn either of our names. Luten, put this equation in its polarized form. I said, when am I ever going to need to know that? And to her credit, she came up with a really good scenario. And she rode a motorcycle to school every day. So she was kind of a rough woman. She goes, when somebody puts a gun to your head someday and says, put this equation in its polarized form. And I didn't have the gumption to ask her when that had ever happened in the history of the world, because I was afraid that it might be her someday robbing me or something, and then I would die. But what a way to go, you know? So I was a good kid. I told lengthy stories, which has never really departed from me. I was in the worship band at church. My church was a big part of my community. My dad wanted to play the guitar, but he had really fat fingers, so he never could. For some reason, my fingers are not fat, I guess. I don't know. So played the guitar, played the drums a little bit, played the bass. So had a blast, played football, ran track, was mediocre at both of those. Had a great community of friends, and I still keep up with them today. The big news of last week, and I don't know if you heard about this or not, but it made the Waco papers, was that the Mexican food joint that we all went to for lunch like every day, and still go to whenever we all meet up back in Christmas. Somebody broke the most burritos in an hour record. And so we were all like texting, like all of our high school buddies were all texting about it. We were like, man, can't believe that guy beat it. So now we're trying to encourage the guy who got beat to, get back in there, and we'll have like a 1980s montage with Eye of the Tiger playing and to go back and beat it. So yeah, I still keep up with those guys, and I was so freaking blessed to have a great community of dudes who they didn't just. Here's the thing: we weren't just friends, but from a spiritual standpoint, and also from a just life standpoint, we were all interested in making sure we were the best version of ourselves and the best version of people. And especially around like matters of faith, we really wanted to understand what we were believing in. We wanted to understand what we were telling other people to believe in. When I started becoming a somewhat better of a musician, how was I becoming a musician? Like what steps was I taking to be the best? And so it was, those guys have always been present, and they've always been phenomenal people. Not just about being supportive, but also like pushing, right? Iron sharpening iron. I mean, that was very much my high school experience.
Wow. That's awesome. I mean, it's refreshing to hear. I mean, my story, obviously. And I mean, I had, friends, right? But that's awesome, man. I mean, I love it. Like I've interviewed like so many people, and it's really cool, like seeing the people as I take them back, and like everybody's childhood is so different. But I think like being able to have like a support group at that young of an age, and like real friends, especially I'm sure you're probably friends. It sounds like you're friends with the majority of them still to this day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
it was a huge blessing. And when you, so the name of this podcast, the Identity Project, that I'm a big etymology nerd. Some people mishear that and they think entomology, which is bugs, and I don't like bugs.
At
But
first I thought you
etymology,
said
which
edamame.
I'm a big edamame fan as well. But etymology is the study of the history of word definitions. And some of those are pretty dang cool. So like whenever I'm doing like a public speaking thing, I always make sure that like I'm using the right definition of the word that I want to put in the speech. It's like proper nerdy stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, it's just
I mean,
awesome.
this is the creative about you that like I just love so much. I mean, honestly, like a lot of it's like over my head, and I'm just like, what is he even talking about right now? But like, I'm just like, it's like, so you have such a creative mind. I mean, obviously you see it in your work, but it's cool to it's cool to be around creative minds, because not everybody's that creative.
Well, it's hopelessly exhausting, I think, for a lot of people to be around creative minds. But the whole reason I bring that up, so like an example of etymology and something that's real cool with what I found there. So let's pick a topical word for you, the word pregnant. Not implying that you're pregnant, but you recently had a kid, or your wife did. You had sex 9 months before that, and then there you go. So the etymology of the word pregnant, like these days we think of the word pregnant as having mostly a biological definition, right? There's a baby inside of you, in your utero, whatever you want to call it. The original definition for the word pregnant, it came from, I think, the 14th century, and it was an expression that meant to be filled with hope. And I read that, and I'm like, that is such a better definition for the word pregnant than just having a kid inside of you, because it represents what that kid is, right? The hope for future, and a better future than the one you have right now. Well, the etymology of the identity, or of the word identity, is sameness, or the state of being the same. So I think it's so fascinating when you bring up words like identity, you bring up words like identity crisis. How do you define an identity crisis? Well, your sameness is broken. And like
Mm,
what you do with iCoach, like you're trying to help people find a new identity. You're helping them try to find a new version of what is the same,
mm.
right? You're replacing what was the same with what could be the same. And that new sameness, that new identity will give them a lot of benefits. So when I look back at my high school, I think of what my identity was back then. I think of what was the same in my life. And it was a bunch of men, or a bunch of brothers, a bunch of my best friends who pushed me and worked hard at the idea of being great, or being consistent and being consistently great, and working towards those things. So the sameness, the identity that I had in high school was just phenomenal.
Mm.
I a way that my pastor these days, he put it once was, I was a jerk of a kid growing up, and he said, it makes for a better testimony, but I hope my children have really boring testimonies about how they grew up in a loving home and, found the Lord early, if religion's the motivator there. So for me, it was the same thing. Like I don't want to say it was a boring high school experience, but it was just great. I mean, they're not the best days of my life, but I'm very grateful for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you ever, I'm always curious, like for the people that did have that experience, did you ever, in college or even later in life, did you ever like feel that need to like, I don't know, like party, if you will, because a lot of the times you'll hear like people that maybe like are just so good throughout high school and then they get off to college and they just go crazy.
I don't know about felt the need. I was talking to my mom about, probably, I don't know, some amount of years ago, but when I was a grown up, or at least old, uh, she asked one time, she was like, Andy, why didn't you ever like try drugs in high school? Why was that never a thing for you? Why did I never catch you drunk or anything like that? And I was like, well, mom, I wore khakis in high school. Like, I don't know. Everybody's like, drugs are everywhere. You open your locker and there's drugs. Like, nobody would offer me drugs because that just wasn't anything that was on my radar. So yeah, it was just never. It wasn't really ever present in the circles that I was in. So even when I got to college, you bringing up sameness, I tended to hang around some of the same types of people that I knew in high school. And so, for example, I didn't drink alcohol until I was out of college. Part of it was, religious kind of devotion to not doing it, believing that the act of not doing something was the goal. And I don't know if I was doing that for the right reasons, because once I got out of college, man, I made up for lost time. But it wasn't really out of a desire to party or anything. I don't know. I think stuff like that is often like a symptom of something. It's not really the problem itself. Uh, and so I learned that in my younger post college years.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. So talk to me a little bit in the transition, like as you're getting towards, junior, senior year, like everybody's like, hey, you're supposed to go to college. Like, what did that kind of transition look like for you? Did you know exactly what you wanted to go to school for and study, or?
I knew where I was going to go to school. I was going to go to Texas A&M University, and that was that decision was probably made when I was like 4 years old. For whatever reason, I always liked the Aggies, even though they were a bit of a weird bunch. We are still a weird bunch. Um, but for whatever reason, it always resonated with me. And the more I learned about the school, and the history of the school and where it came from, the more I knew that was the place for me. It's certainly not the place for everybody, but it was definitely the place for me. And there's people rolling their eyes right now hearing that, but that's okay. You may be one of them, and that's okay too. So the
No,
transition for me was
so my grandpa actually went there and my
really,
cousin went there and
oh, they sound like good people.
yeah, my little sister Lauren was trying to get in, but she couldn't. So now she's actually going to TWU, like I said. But yeah, we have quite a bit of family members that have gone there. So
Well, it's gotten so hard. I mean, even though it's the largest university in the country now, it has more students than any other university. In College Station, I think up like 70,000 people. There's no way I could get in now. I got in by the skin of my teeth, and it was only because my dad was a legacy. So yeah, it never would have happened otherwise. So I'm glad I got in when I did. That's for sure. But yeah, for the transition was pretty easy. I knew where I was going to go. In terms of what I wanted to study, I've always been curious about uh, people struggling. I've always been curious about why humans do what they do. There's a doctor of persuasion or doctor and or PhD guy who studies persuasion at Arizona State. His name's Robert Cialdini. I was exposed to some of his work when I was in high school, and I thought it was fascinating. It was about persuasion, how people are persuaded. So I was like, cool, I'm going to go and I'm going to study psychology. Now, luckily, psychology is kind of a fallback major for a lot of people. No offense to psychology majors out there, but it made it easier for me to get into school because at A&M, you're not accepted to the university, you're accepted to a major. And so, I went in wanting to be a psychology major. I made it 2 weeks before I wanted to change my major. And then I kind of danced
What
around majors
what
for.
was the thing that was there a specific moment or teacher or class or like what was it that let you know?
Yep, there was a just awful my intro psychology professor. It was so bad. And I was like, in 2 weeks, I was like, I do not want to be associated with this. I almost dropped the class too. He was just strange and what he focused on. And so that being my first semester of college, I probably overreacted if I'm honest. I'm like, this isn't for me. And so I knew I was going to change my major. I had to wait till the end of the semester, but yeah, I went ahead and changed at that point. I wanted to go to physics briefly, but then I remembered that involves a certain amount of math. So I didn't do that because math. And so from there, I went to sports management, which sounds like a complete waste of a degree. And the career prospects for a sports management person are like they're not great. I'll put it that way. And I wanted to be a sports agent at that time, but then I talked to a sports agent. He was like, "What in the hell is sports management? You don't want to manage sports. You want to manage people. To manage people, you need a contract. To do contract stuff, you need a law degree. He says you should switch to economics or business." This was after like a year, but it was actually at a convenient time because it was getting up to the point where at that time at A&M, the sports management program was part of the kinesiology program, and every kinesiology major had to take anatomy and physiology. Nope. And so I noped right out of that major because that was one of the hardest courses at A&M. And I do not, no offense, Justin, I do not care where the connection point in the hamstring is. Could not care less. I know when it hurts and I swear at it, and that's kind of how I treat it. But yeah, I don't need to know where it is or what it's called. The dorsiflexum muscular, whatever tension. Uh, I know what proprioception is. That's about as anatomy and physiology as I get. So then I settled. I did what everybody does when they cannot decide on a major at Texas A&M. I switched to a communications major with a business minor. And I somehow ended up, I think, almost with a Spanish minor as well, or could have double majored or something like that too.
Hmm. Interesting. So was that it for you? Did you do 4 years and then you were out, or did you stay longer there? Or?
I did 4 years. I would have stayed 4.5 years, but our football team wasn't very good, and that would have been the only reason I wanted to stay another semester. Because I was ready to be out of college. There was a theory of communication class, Com 305, back at A&M, and we had to learn a lot about it was stuff that I couldn't see a direct correlation for to any sort of path for the future. So like one of the questions the guy was asking, it was like, what's the difference between Euclid and Aristotle's theory on dualism? And I was like, who cares? Like, when am I going to use this? And the bad part about that was the dean, or he was the dean, and I didn't realize that. That's not good. Like, find out if your professor is the dean of the school, and his wife was my advisor, which I also didn't realize. So I got called in about that one. That was bad. Yeah. So, but I learned a lot in other courses like organizational communication, interpersonal communication. My favorite class was about presidential rhetoric. And we studied presidential speech, and it was just fascinating. And I imagine that class would be even more fascinating these days with the presidential rhetoric or lack thereof that we have.
Wow.
That's not a political statement, by the way. Not a political statement at all.
Hey, politics. It's like the news for me. Man, so it's just so, I mean, I know like kind of like what you do now, and then hearing that, it's just like interesting. But so what did you do as your first job? Like what did that first career look like for you? And then ultimately, like, how did you get into everything that you're doing now? Because that's communications major to what yeah. Take
Okay,
me from A to
so,
B.
well, is that a journey? So I've always believed in the Aggie network, and Aggies take care of Aggies. It's kind of insular and it's kind of nepotistic, but that's okay, I think. So I used some Aggie network connections and got some interviews that I wasn't qualified for, and got some job offers that I probably wasn't qualified for. But I took a random. Okay, so my dad was a salesman. He was like a salesman. Like he was really good. One of his best friends, I talked to him a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, and he said, "Man, your daddy was the best salesman I'd ever met, aside from myself." And I was like, "Okay, all right, that's." So that was one of my dad's best friends. But he said they would go in and sell anything to anybody, and I hadn't really had that experience in my life yet, and so I wanted to get some time as a salesman to connect with my dad a little bit more. So instead of moving to Chicago, which was my other big job offer, it was an offer with Southwestern Bell or AT&T, whatever they were back then. I decided instead to take a job at Sewell Saab Hummer in Plano, Texas, selling luxury cars. And I know it's not a typical route, right? Most people don't go to college for 4 years to become car salespeople. And it was actually really funny. Half of my friends and family were like, "Okay, so Andy, you went to college for 4 years at a good school. Now you're going to be a car salesman." And I was like, "Hey, come on, guys, give me a little credit here." And then the other half of my friends and family were like, "Yeah, we can totally see you being a car salesman." Like, "Come on, guys, give me a little bit of credit here, you know?" So I went into car sales, and that was a fascinating time in my life. I mean, absolutely fascinating being on the other side of a car sales transaction and learning about people. Car sales is a people job. If you do not know people, you're going to be awful at it. Now, note that I didn't say learning how to be nice to people and treating them well, although I did. Um, it's just fascinating to see. I had some really, really well off clients and really, really wealthy ones, but seeing even somebody like that, Fortune 500 CEO sitting down to negotiate a car purchase, you realize that how people tend to react when they don't have all the information they need is usually the same thing. And if you can understand how they're probably thinking, then it's real easy for you to ask them two or three questions. They answer themselves right into the corner when the solution is to buy my car. Because really, I mean,
Yep.
here, I'll boil it down for you. Car sales is all about this. You have to give people the permission to do the thing that they showed up to do, which is buy a car. So I sold at Sewell Saab Hummer of Plano, and then I went down to Sewell Cadillac, and it was great at Sewell Cadillac. So anybody who's not in Dallas, all the nice car dealerships are on Lemon Avenue, which I always thought was hilarious. Cars and being lemons and whatnot. Anyway, so I was down at Sewell Cadillac, and we would have people walk in, and they would always throw up the first defense, right? "Oh, we're just looking," or "We were just in the neighborhood." Well, back then, that neighborhood that Sewell Cadillac was in was awful. Like there was like police like going by all the time. So there was this nice, sweet elderly couple once. They were like, "Oh, we just happened to be in the neighborhood," and I was like, "What were you doing in this neighborhood? Were you buying or selling drugs?" Like, no, you were probably somewhat interested in purchasing a vehicle. That's why you're there to look at vehicles. So it was one of the most fascinating times of my life. I didn't make a lot of money. I wasn't very good. I cared a lot about my customers though. And I cared very much for the experience that they had, not only buying a car, but after they bought a car. I cared very much about the service they got, with our service guys, any warranty stuff. Um, and that really, it helped me learn a lot about myself and what I want to stand for. I think if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for anything. Um, so I may not have been the best salesman. I wasn't my dad, um, but I had a big heart for my customers, and I think I get that from my mom and my brother. And so I'm thankful to the car business for teaching me that. And then I had the most random job transition I say in my life. I'm now in the job that I've had ever since then. I went from selling luxury vehicles to financial software consulting in like 2 months. I still have no idea how it happened.
I was gonna say, was that an Aggie Connect?
No, well, okay, it was a good buddy of mine that I knew from church. He knew there was an opening on his team, and we had like 6 other friends who worked there. So they helped me get the interview, and I was like, "All right, I'll just go in for this interview." And so I went in and talked to a lady named TJ. And she would end up being my first boss. And she said, well, you don't have a lot of financial experience. I said, well, you probably weren't planning on paying me, as if I did. She kind of said, okay, well, fair point. And I said, well, you guys are the training department, right? She said, well, yeah. I said, all right, well, I'm a quick learner. Like, just train me. Like, if I suck, then just get rid of me after a year. But I'll learn and I'll do well. And somehow that worked, and got that job. And 10 and a half years later, here I am. And then there's some
Wow.
other stuff I do on the side as well. But that's my
Yeah.
primary job, is financial software consultant.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So with the consultant, you're doing sales or you're just doing consulting?
Oh, bro, I do
Or you do
anything and everything.
everything? Got it.
Yeah. So the main thing that I did for the first part of my career there was, whenever somebody would buy our software, buy our services, we would get them implemented. We would teach them how to use the software. We would take all their data in whatever format it was in and make it work in our system, because our system was going to be the new normal for them. And then from there, I would start going out to existing clients and teach them how to use the software better. I would take a look at their operations and say, okay, you have a lot of people in this department. Most of our other clients deploy their senior people here. You're kind of doing it backwards. I mean, I was in New York in January doing the exact same thing. Actually, even more recently, I was doing the same thing in March. So yeah, and from there, I've developed good relationships with a few different clients, and so I'd start to help out with the relationship management there. And then that got into some pre-sales stuff. Then that got into some international travel, and we needed somebody to go help speak at a, yeah, you want to talk about an interesting sounding conference, a Scandinavian middle market loan operations conference. So I went there to speak at that. Um, so just stuff like that. I'm kind of a jack of all trades. And I mean, when you talk about the creative side of my brain kind of making me a little bit hard to keep up with, I mean, that's the number of roles I've had with that company. For a brief period, I was going to move out to Singapore with the company. That fell apart at the last minute, which is kind of a bummer. So yeah, they've taken me around the world. Uh, they've helped me nurture the love that I have for travel, because I do travel, or I used to travel for work quite a bit. That's kind of tailed off recently. Um, so yeah, it's a crazy world, and the more you learn about finance, the more you learn that you're kind of afraid about finance, just with the amount of money that's out there. And um, the financial crisis makes a heck of a lot more sense to me now, which I'm very thankful for, because I actually started the day that Lehman Brothers crashed. So I started the day that the financial world nearly collapsed. So it's interesting seeing the trends since then and learning more about that, and kind of looking at where we are today and saying, okay, are we headed in the same direction, or what would that look like if something were to happen these days? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been a wonderful career, honestly.
That's amazing. So knowing the photography that you're doing now, like at what point did that pick up along the journey? I mean, obviously you said you started to travel more. Do you remember like the first trip that you took, the first picture that you took that you were just like, oh my God, like kind of fell in love with the process of it?
Man, this is going to sound probably far different than you ever imagined. So I got into photography out of sheer laziness, which sounds weird. I have my camera with me, because I always had to fidget with something, and my camera was nearby. So here it is. So I started a travel blog in 2012, and I've always loved traveling. I went to Europe for the first time in 1997. My uncle was nice enough to take me out there. Before that, my grandmother was a big believer in travel, and so we would go out as a family to Hawaii a few different times together. And so I've always loved traveling. And I'm sad to say I've probably seen more of the world than I've seen of the United States, but I'm working on that. So I started a travel blog in 2012, and the whole reason was for stories. I love stories. I love the idea of a narrative, beginning, middle, climax, and an end. Um, so I went to Israel with my brother on a mistake fare. Mistake fare is really just when an airline loads in a ticket price improperly, they drop a zero off the end of it, and you can go buy it before they realize their mistake. So I was looking one day, and there was a mistake fare from DFW to Tel Aviv for $430. So my brother and I ended up going to Israel we only had like 4 days there, but we went and had a great time. It was very significant as a religious person. Uh, it's a very significant place to go, really, no matter what religion you are now. I guess if you're Zoroastrian, may not really be that nice of a place. But I went there; it was very significant. Wept openly at a few spots, and it was pretty cool. So that when I got back, people would be like, "Hey, how's your trip?" And I'd be like, "Good," and that was it.
Hmm.
And I just thought to myself, okay, no, there's more of a story than that. There's more to talk about here. So I decided to put together a little blog because I wanted to tell the whole story of that trip to Israel. The cool uh, tour guide we had named Boaz, because of course his name was Boaz. Um, he was a former Israeli military guy, and he worked in weapons ordnance disposal. And so as we're like driving around, all you see next to you are minefield, and I'm like, oh yeah, this would be my kind of field. So it was fascinating, and I felt like there was a really big story to tell, and I wanted to tell a story. I didn't have the venue to say it, so people are asking to work. Everybody just says, "Oh, it's good." You don't want to get the whole detail. It's kind of like when somebody says, like, "Hey, how are you doing?" You're like, "Well, I have stomach problems, and I've been on the toilet all morning." Like nobody's going to say that. You're just going to say, "Oh, good," like everybody else says. So started the blog, and I started blogging more. And at first, I was writing these long, awesomely written articles that nobody was really reading. And so then I was thinking to myself, like, all right, I looked at my competition and I saw that they were taking marginal pictures. I was also taking marginal pictures, like an old, point and shoot camera. And I was like, well, I don't like writing these long articles and nobody reads them anyway. And they say a picture's worth 1,000 words. So if I take better pictures, I won't have to write as much, because the whole 1,000 words thing. But then also, like from a business standpoint, I knew I wanted to make money from my blog someday. And so I looked at what my competitors were doing. They were writing great articles with marginal pictures. I figured, okay, I kind of am who I am as a writer. Um, but my pictures can get better faster than my writing can get better. And that can be what sets me apart. So I started taking pictures for andystravelblog.com. Couldn't think of a more creative title. And that just kind of picked up, man. Photography is very much a disease, and you have to be really careful when you want to get into it, because all of a sudden you're like, well, I need this lens and I need this lens. And what happened to all that money I used to have? Like, it's all invested in cameras now. It's kind of like buying a boat. They say the two happiest days of your life are when you buy a boat, when you sell that boat.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
it's kind of the same with photography, man. You're like, oh, cool, this is a great camera. It takes wonderful pictures. But then I think about how much money I spent on this thing. Like, man, it would have been nice to just use an iPhone and just never have learned about all this stuff. So started taking pictures for the blog when I would travel places. I always try to cheat when I take pictures. Like, if you either are in a really pretty place or are taking pictures of somebody who's really pretty, you don't really have to be that great of a photographer. But I got into that, learned more about it, and it's a nice creative outlet for me, because although I do believe there is art and data comparisons in Excel spreadsheets, because there's a lot of different ways to get to the same place, I needed a little bit more of a creative outlet, and it's kind of cool having my little slice of the internet, and being somewhat known for my photos now. And my blog is, by I think any metric, a successful blog. It's not huge by any means, but I reliably get 25 to 30,000 unique viewers a month, and have good page view traffic, and I make enough money to help pay for a trip or two every year from it. And that's led to a semi-professional photography career that I'm pretty dang proud of. And I think I did $20,000 in business last year, against like $30,000 in expenses, but that's okay. So yeah, it's gone from trying to take pictures of pretty landscapes and avoiding taking pictures of people to now taking headshots of people and having a decent business there. And you've been kind enough to use the picture that I took of you a couple times on your social medias.
Great picture, by the way.
I mean, I've learned so much since then, and I cannot wait to get you in front of my camera again, because I'm so much more capable now than I was back then. I'm just as eager, but a lot more capable.
Hey, I love that. I mean, that's the evolution, right? I mean, that's the journey for forever. Hopefully everything just continues to level up.
Well,
So
I was going to say, yeah, and I mean, and part of that, I think, whenever you hire somebody to take pictures, and it'd be the same way somebody hiring you to help them with nutrition. I'm not hiring you because of what like, or for who you are right now. I'm hiring you because of where you were at it and what you've gotten. Like, people aren't hiring me to take my next picture. They're hiring me to have taken 200,000 crappy ones and learned how to get better as a result of it. So yeah, I have good gear, I have good equipment, I know a lot about photography, but you're hiring me because I've taken enough pictures to know how to take a really good one, and really almost guarantee, not guarantee, but pretty dang close. I'm going to get at least a good one, if not a great one. And it, there's mastery involved there, and it's not easy sometimes, but it's the same way with you and coaching people, or with anybody getting good at something. It's I'm running a race now, and I used to be at the starting line. And it's so interesting to compare my photos from back then, because I know I can remember what I was thinking when I took that photo. And yeah, you want to go back and slap yourself for thinking that, but at the same time, I'm really happy that I've taken so many bad photos, because now I can take some good ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I tell people, I tell clients all the time, I'm like, if I'm saying the same stuff that I was saying 10 years ago, like, please fire me. Like,
Yeah.
like, and so that's towards anything that you do. But, um, man, so it's just cool to see like something like that, go from really just this like creative, like side project to what it's, I mean, I know you're super humble, but I mean, those are pretty big numbers. That's a pretty big deal. Like, I mean, maybe it's not generating tons and tons of money, but like there's a lot of people that are interested in your work. And I think that's awesome. Was there a period?
I'm very, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, was like what? How long did it take you to finally like start the blog? Like, were you sitting on that for a while? Like, because like so many people think about like, I mean, for me, I feel like I was thinking about it forever, and I just, I probably did it later than I should have. But did you? Was it something you just automatically did, or were you kind of sitting on the idea for a while, or?
Well, I mean, because it was a side project, the risk of doing it was really nothing.
Yeah.
If I started a blog and my mom read it and that was it, I'd be happy, because then my mom knew the whole story of my trip to Israel. But then
Yeah.
some other people read it and they were like, "Yeah, it's pretty good." But it was more for me, and then other people started reading along, and then I realized, okay, I had readers now. So I had, yeah, having it is as much of it's a huge blessing, and I'm very thankful for it. But it's also kind of a curse, because now I haven't blogged in like a week and a half. And it's like stressing me out. I'm trying to think of stuff to blog about. And I have my next post. I just need to write it. Um, but there was it, I can't really think of a time that it wasn't really wonderful to have a blog, uh, because I'm part of a network that helps me selling the ad space for it, and they do all the IT stuff for me. So I don't really have to focus on any of that stuff. I don't have to focus on ad sales, which is a huge blessing, because ad rates are just in the tank right now. Um, I can just focus on the writing, and I can focus on the photography, and my travel blog is, whenever I have something to say, I say it. And it's just been great. I've gotten super lucky with some articles I wrote at the right time that are still getting, hundreds of page views literally every single day. I rank in the top 5 on Google, for Google searches. I rank in the top 5 on like, I think 161 different search terms, and I'm number 1 on I think 21 of them. And I'd love to say that's on
Yeah.
purpose, um, but I've gotten lucky. But at the same time, I think people confuse luck with hard work, and I've worked hard at the blog. I know I'm kind of nonchalant about it, but I take a lot of pride in it. I'm just around my 1,000th post. It's almost about 5.5 years, or almost 6.5 years old. I have lifetime, I think, 1.5 million page views on it, which that doesn't tell the whole story, right? You can have something really terrible get a lot of attention, but there's people who, I hear from people all the time, like, man, I travel vicariously through you. I live vicariously through you. And these are moms and dads who have great kids and great families. And, I wanted to get married young and have a lot of kids, and that hasn't happened. I'm in my mid 30s now, or looking at the tail end of my mid 30s. And I wanted to have that life. And so I'll always say to them, listen, I'm living just as vicariously through you. Like the sleepless nights and all that. I know it's tough, but you know, I I'm so proud of my friends. I'm proud of you as well, and Alex, for there's some kids that have just been born, have some really freaking awesome parents. And so I always say to people, and anybody who's out there, you get pregnant, I'll probably say the same thing to you. If I know you, is that I'm happy for y'all, but I'm really happy for your kid, because your kid gets to have people like you as parents. So I live just as vicariously through those people as they live through me. At the same time, though, it's fun to be recognized in airports from time to time. It's fun to get insider access to things. It's just been there are some hard times with it as well. And I try to write about the hard times, not just the good times. The other comment I get a lot is people say they wish they could travel like me, because I use miles and points. I'm not wealthy by any stretch, mainly because of photography, and the money I invest in gears, or in photography gear. People will say a lot though, after seeing these first class trip reports and stuff like that, Andy, I wish I could travel like you. And I always say the same thing back to them. I say, listen, I wish I could travel like me too. Like on the blog, as much as I try to give you a full, experience of what it's like to travel, like I leave out a lot of the bad stuff. I leave out like when I've been really depressed and I use travel as a means of getting away from something. Like I leave that part out. So people are getting a very edited version of my life, and on Instagram, on Facebook, people are getting a very, very edited version of my life. I live a great life and a blessed life, and I'm thankful for that. But I struggle with a lot of stuff, just like everybody does. And so I think that's something that, if you go visit Andy's travel blog, I encourage everybody to, of course, read some of those trip reports. I mean, they're phenomenal. But just know that like who you are when you're here is who you are when you're on the road. And who I am as a single guy, or I'm dating somebody around, who I am right now is who I'll be when I have kids, or who you are when you're poor is who you'll probably be when you're wealthy. So wherever you are, deal with your crap now. Don't think that travel's going to fix you, because it won't. Don't think that getting married is going to fix your relationship, or getting a dog is going to help anything, stuff like that. So I've learned that by traveling when I shouldn't have, and writing. And I would always use the blog as an excuse. Like, well, I need to go to Hong Kong for the blog. And they're like, are you really just sad because you got broken up with recently? I'm like, no, that's not it. I need to go to Hong Kong because it's relatively cheap. They're like, okay, because this sounds like you're really just sad and you want to run. Like, no, it's not it at all. And that was totally it. So yeah, there's push and pull to everything, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're exactly right in that every single person in this world, no matter how perfect they make their life to be on social media, like we all have something we're going through. We all have our own problems. And honestly, anybody that says that they don't, like, I think that they're full of shit. So, yeah. Hey, I could probably sit here and dive into so many different of your trips, and I know that you have so many experiences to share. But if you had to pick one trip, and I'm sure you've wrote about it on the blog, but if you had to pick one trip to use what I love about podcasting for, this platform, like what would be the trip that you would kind of tell to people that really just like was life changing for you? You mentioned the Israel trip.
I think Israel that was the trip that meant the most to me, because not only was Israel, and like I said, I'm a religious person, so Israel has a certain pull, but I was also there with my brother, and that meant the world to me. No pun intended, but I'm not upset that the pun happened. It meant so much to me that I was there with my brother. It was a very significant experience for both of us, and we were there together. I know Israel doesn't have that same pull for everybody, so outside of a religious experience, the trip that I think was just epic in every single way was going down to New Zealand for a week. It's a magical place full of really friendly people with awesome accents. And then every once in a while you walk past a rugby player and you just think about, like, I now know what what it looks like or feels like to look at somebody and say, you could instantly kill me and it wouldn't you wouldn't even break a sweat. Like if I was ever in a place and you told me to move and I said no, I would be done as a person because you're the size of a mountain. So yeah, New Zealand was incredible. It was foreign but accessible. It wasn't cheap by any means, but I used hotel points to kind of take the edge off that a little bit. You had to fly a long way to get there. It has all the trimmings of a great trip, and then you get there, and it's one of the most beautiful places in the world, kind of on the edge of the world. New Zealand, Norway, Torres del Paine National Park in Chile, all these places. Once you get really close to the poles, the world starts looking really interesting. So yeah, New Zealand was just phenomenal. But I tell you what, I'm also excited about every trip I get to take. Uh, and I went to Georgia recently, the country, not the state. I actually went to the state recently too, but I went to Georgia, and that was incredible because I was in a very foreign place. The letters didn't look the same. I couldn't speak really any of the language. I just had to reach out to people and trust everything, and rented a car and drove there, and had to trust Waze, except the Waze would give me the street names in Georgian, which wasn't helpful at all. It said, take a left on Krapaslakasnov or something like that. Cool, I'm just going to go left, and hopefully that was it. So, yeah, New Zealand is a place that a lot of people say, I want to go there once before I die. And I say, don't go there twice, at least. So I still haven't been back yet. But when I was leaving the country, the customs guy was stamping me out my passport and said, all right, come back soon. And I was like, yeah, I really want to, but I haven't
That's
yet. So I need
awesome.
to.
Yeah, no, I actually, it's funny. One of my girlfriends in high school that I dated, she moved there and does like real estate out there. Um, but yeah, I've seen pictures. It's definitely one of the places that's on my bucket list for sure. Did you do anything out there that was like just super epic, like activity wise?
I didn't do like any of the bungee jumping. It's an extreme sports place, kind of like Lucerne in Switzerland. I didn't do any of that stuff. I just walked around and got like blown away by nature. And this is before I knew anything about photography at all. I had a little camera, I was taking pictures and whatnot. I posted a lot of them on the blog, but I would just walk around and get lost in the woods right next to Queenstown, New Zealand, and just look out over the lake and be like, this is a really perfect place. Like it was a place where like exhaling feels different because you're not just exhaling like, carbon dioxide. You're exhaling stress. You're exhaling, I don't know. It just feels like at the end of that trip, I was like, man, I'm in such a good place now because you can't be upset there. It's kind of like, I don't know, like a really terrible song to listen to when you're in a bad mood is Uptown Girl by Billy Joel because it's such a happy sounding song. Can you ever imagine that? Like, oh, I'm really upset. Uptown Girl, and you're like headbanging to it. Like nobody would ever do that, right? Or like Baby Shark. Nobody would ever be upset and listen to Baby Shark. It's just going to make your life worse. That's kind of how I felt in New Zealand. Like it was very hard for me to be stressed about anything. I didn't have a thing in the world to do, which meant I had no schedule to keep up to. I was beholden to nobody. I'd check my work email every once in a while, and I'd watch the Aggie football team play at a very odd hour of the day because of the time difference. But it was just a wonderful place, and I was in a good spot when I went there. I went there because I wanted to go there. I wasn't running from anything, so it was great. So I want to go back there, but I'm kind of saving it to go back to for when I want to take somebody really special, to take a girlfriend or the wife there. Because I've experienced it, and that's kind of how I travel these days. I go to like scout out places that I want to return to with somebody really special, and there are certain places that I will not go back to again until that somebody is with me. So like the Lofoten Islands in Norway, which is the first place I saw the Northern Lights, Croatia. There's a little mountain village in Austria that I love called St. Gilgen because it's one of the most boring places I've ever been. But and this could be a whole different podcast. I think human beings suck at being bored because we always have something to stimulate us. And I think creativity sucks as a result of it. That like we don't put our kids in situations where they'll be bored anymore. Or like we'll give, and this, I know this is so easy to say as somebody who's not a parent, but like give a kid a screen or something like that that has anything they want on it. Or I'll see with people with their puppies. Like I'm not equating a kid to a puppy. They'll have like 7 different toys on the floor for the puppy, and the puppy will like run to one and it'll like shake it, and then it'll put it down and grab the next one and shake that. Like, okay, that puppy needs to learn that one toy is okay. Or like with kids, like there was a point in my life where I would go out in the backyard and I would find a stick, and that stick would be a laser gun, that stick would be a sword, that stick would be something else. And like I had plenty of toys, but my dad would just get bored or whatever, or he and my mom would want to watch TV and be like, hey, it's backyard time. And that was time to go in the backyard. Or like I go in the sandbox. You think like the concept of a sandbox, everybody gets it, right? And you're like, oh, sandbox is fun. We took a part of a yard, put wood around it, and poured sand into it. Like it sounds so stupid, but like everybody absolutely loved it. It was so much fun being in the sandbox because you'd make a castle, you'd make a mountain or something. You had action figures, they'd walk up the mountain. And nowadays you're like, watch a YouTube video, somebody play video games. And you're like, well, no, that maybe it's better to have bored people because then you have to find out some way to entertain yourself. And this little mountain village in Austria is really boring. There's nothing to do. There's like 2 restaurants there. Um, but I've been out there a ton of times. I used to go out there 2 or 3 times a year just to be bored for a little while. And I would just sit out on a park bench and, looking over this lake. And it was like the best boredom I've ever experienced. I would do nothing all day and it was phenomenal.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. I think that human beings need to do that. They need to like be in their own thoughts more and, not be afraid to always have a stimulus, always be talking to somebody. But, I always joke with Alex, it's like me time's the best time.
Well, yeah, and I would advise ducking after you say that, especially to a new mom. But I agree. I think we all have dark, quiet nights of the soul when we have to just be with ourselves. And I think there's a lot of people who invest a lot of time and effort in not being around their own thoughts. And there's a lot, people doing. Not everybody who does drugs does it for this reason, but there have been a lot of people in my life who have done drugs and have had drug problems and addictions. And like hell, when I drank too much for a certain period of my life, um, that was kind of, I'd rather dull myself. I don't want to face who I am at night. I don't want to face who I am when it's just me and my thoughts, looking up at a ceiling fan. I think anybody who knows me well knows I didn't sleep very well for a long, long time. That's mainly because I was facing myself and I would do some work. And I had to face a lot of stuff there. And it's not hard, but man, was it worth it. I don't claim that I don't have any issues today, but I know I'm a better man than I used to be, even pretty recently. Like probably for a lot of our friendship together, half of it at least. Um, there's some dark nights. I think people have that. Everybody's going to have it. It's what they choose, whether they choose to face that or run from it. I think that tells the story of a human being, because that's the one taking it all back. That's the one sameness we're all going to return to is our own thoughts. So you got to learn how to address them, how to fight them, how to accept them, and then how to gradually change them.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I love that.
Beautiful segue, right? Yeah.
That was amazing. Andy, dude, like I said, man, I could probably sit here and talk to you for hours on end, but I want to respect your time. I know we're getting late here in Dallas, but where can everybody find you at? The blog, social media, all of these things so that they can start following your work, my man?
Yeah, so andystravelblog.com, that is the blog. On most weeks, on Sundays, I post a picture of the week and I get into a little bit of how I took it. I'm on Instagram at RealAndyLuten. I do have a website of my portfolio work at lutencreative.com. So my last name, Luten, creative.com. And then, Facebook and the Twitters and everything else. But, the portfolio, the Luten Creative, that has a lot of work that I'm really proud of, has a lot of shots in and around Dallas. And then, you can find me out at, I'm pretty active in Dallas. So if you're ever down by the Trinity River levees and you see a photographer sitting there with a tripod, just walk up and ask if their name is Andy, and there's a good chance you'll meet me.
There you go. There you go. Well, Andy, thank you so much, my man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll talk soon.
All right. Love you, buddy. Take care.